Hey everyone, welcome. You are at Content Strategies, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Tableau 18.3. My name is Ryan Stryker. I'm a Senior Solution Architect with Tableau Professional Services, and I've been at Tableau about 6.5 years now, and that picture is about 5 years old, and I use old pictures because I avoid the camera, whereas my co-host here likes to try to eat them. I'll let him introduce himself in just a moment, but I want to talk a little bit about our agenda today. It's going to be a little bit of a Jason sandwich. Jason's going to talk about existing tools with regards in the product that deal with content organization and talk about high-level strategy. I'm going to take over and dig a little deep into how you may think about organizing a site in terms of grouping users and grouping content. And then Jason's going to get back up here and talk about product features with regards to the kind of features that will affect the kinds of things we've been talking about today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jason.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Gorfine, like you said, staff UX designer here at Tableau. I've been here about 4 years, on again, off again, PO, sometimes a PM. Then they realize they've made a mistake, and then I go back to what I do. How many folks here, just before we get started, are new with their deployments? All right, I like that. Okay, how many folks here have robust ones? Have been at this for a while? A lot of content, all that action. How many of you here are just upset and want to yell at somebody when it's over? Okay, awesome, great, good, awesome. Well, since I said upset, why don't we talk about the extremes? And we won't spend a lot of time on it. There are extremes to the approaches. Some folks like to call it structured and organic. Really what we're talking about here is set, lots of rules. No one does anything without knowing exactly what they're allowed to do. And the other's a little bit more like a Montessori school, let folks play. I think everyone who has data and is building these visualizations wants to enable collaboration, wants to enable exploration, wants people to be working together. As we build our feature sets out to do that, it should get easier, but no matter what, governance will always be in play. It'll always be a tension between the two, so let's just assume reality exists somewhere in the middle as I go through these items. You won't find me judging one approach versus the other. I don't even favor one approach versus the other, or recommend one. It all depends on you. What we want to do is make it so that you can. So, what we hear a lot from folks usually revolves around these three questions, no matter really where they are in their journey. Oftentimes folks will start their deployment one way, and as they start to grow it, go, oh man, and then they go back and revisit these. But after 4 years, I can reduce a lot of it down to this. Now, what I want to do, aside from show you some cool stuff in 18.3 we think will help new feature-wise without changing the permissions model that's below it, is turn these sort of into my approach to how we're going to talk about it today. So this is how we're going to work through it. I might ask you to raise hands later again, so keep them warm. Now, choose between one site or many. This is a different conversation pre- and post-nested projects, but it's not entirely different. And it doesn't go away. People still struggle with it, or at least reapproach it as they've had it for a while. Now, again, before nested projects, a lot of it was down to, am I using my site as a top-level folder? Am I specifically catering it to something? Do I want to guarantee to the satisfaction of the folks that are in charge of security that these are secure because they are separate? Sites did that. Sites still do that as a walled garden. But I'd like to show you sort of a one content hierarchy that's the same 3 different ways, right? So let's assume Tableau's laid out like this. We've got HR, we've got finance, marketing, sales, all that action. Now, I'm told we got to keep HR and finance totally separate and secure. Got to be separate. I say fine. And they go, everything else, we don't mind. You can handle your security at the project level. We think that'll be sufficient. Now, never mind for a moment that there's going to be users that stretch across all these sites. That just happens. We don't make that particularly awesome. We are going to make it better in the future. But let's say I also just want to do this because sites are hard. I don't want to deal with it. Once nested projects came into play, this is absolutely something you can do. Ryan and I sometimes differ on this because he's a strict individual when it comes to security, and he's not wrong. And he'll probably get deeper into that later. But the goal really is to make this a possibility if you want it, just to cut down on sheer overhead. Now, one thing multiple sites are always good for, and I'm showing you something that exists. I have seen clients that do this. Let me just, for one moment, mention, I didn't know there was highly confidential and confidential as a concept, but that exists. So we have customers that have previously kept these on different servers and now keep them on different sites. They used to have a highly confidential server, but now they're like, you know what, I can get this done. Another really common scenario that works pretty well is the idea of a company that either does reseller work or puts their content out to external customers. They'll have it separate. Now, of course, if they're publishing the same data across those sites, we get into the cross-site conversation, which we will not tackle here, though if you have time, we'd love to talk about it. Because while sites are walled, we're finding more and more often that customers are going, but can I have a door in the wall? We'll see how that goes. Now, you've got the largest containers. Now we talk about users. Last year, or actually, is it this year? Man, time flies. We moved to the subscription model. We also sort of shifted how you look at the users in the system. They all have the same graphic because honestly, they could all be the same person over the lifetime of using Tableau, and people can move sort of up and down through this. But from least to greatest capability-wise, we've got the viewer. That's usually going to be your consumer. That person can view and interact. They can set the data, or they can receive data alerts. They can receive subscriptions. It's pretty useful. And all three of these folks can use the mobile app, just for the record. The Explorer, previously known as Interactor, they can do all the things viewer can do. They can connect to data sources that have been created. And of course, they can create vizzes using web authoring, which I am told is at 75% feature parity at this point with desktop. It's not something we're touting, but 75% is pretty good for a lot of the things you want to get done. And then, of course, top of the line, although I'm not selling to you, is the creator. And they can do all the things those other folks can do, plus they can connect to and create data sources. They also get the Tableau desktop app and the Tableau prep app. Now, we want to complete the journey of desktop to the web. We also want to bring prep to the web. I think some folks may have seen some stuff on that today. We're not going to cover that, sorry. But we are going to talk about structuring content, particularly in 18.3. Now, all the ways. Let's look from site down. How do we structure content? Who here uses one of these methods to organize their content? Good, 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 awesome, most, and some folks are tired. Okay. Sandbox is my favorite because Sandbox. People say it all the time. I love it. You're going to see them today, and we're going to talk about them later. And there's some TC Labs on them as well. But let's talk about nested projects just for a moment because it's helpful. Pre-nested projects, this was basically all you had available to you. And, well, a little bit more than that. Afterwards, we allow you to sort of create down there. The reason that fades off into infinity is I don't think we set a theoretical limit, but we'll find it. Now, that's 10.5 on. By the way, how many people here have 10.5 or have used nested projects? That'll help me gauge why your faces are scrunched or not. All right, so that's actually a good number of folks. Well, nested projects are great, but it kind of didn't quite fix it. We know that. Folks usually start with, I'm so glad you have it, followed by a litany of items. Now, some of that has to do with how we execute the experience itself. But for just one sec, let's go all the way up and down. We're going to look at the content hierarchy, the architecture as it stands in Tableau today, and just, workbooks, data sources, they live on the same level. We're not going to talk about them just yet. That's what you have available. Before nested projects, if you had Tableau, you sort of only had this to be your container. So what folks did was they went up or down. They started using workbooks essentially like projects, or they did I want to separate out different areas into separate sites. And really after a while, they may have stopped asking themselves the question, why did I do that? Or I don't want to change because now it's insights, and how do I move it because it's not fun? I hear you. There's empathy here. We use the product too. And then of course there's this. There's a lot of those. And if you're going to navigate down through a hierarchy and see the same set of tabs every time, case in point, this is an actual project in Tableau. Hopefully it doesn't have anything confidential in it. It does not. But this is our bootcamp project. Now, we have nested projects here. If I navigate into this, it does start me on workbooks. which about 50% of our users love. The other 50% want to start on projects. There's nuance. We could debate the best way to do this. Let's just say we didn't do it great. Now, also, I as a viewer may not care what a workbook is. I may not care what a data source is. That's not really helpful right now that I see everything else. A lot of folks have said to us, I don't know what a workbook is, I don't care. I don't know what a data source is, I don't care. Or I opened a data source, oh my God, what is this? Let's pretend I could snap my fingers between 18.2 and 18.3 and make it different. Oh, gosh, I forgot my favorite thing. Let's just say you want to make a project full of data sources, because that's a reasonable thing you might want to do for people that create. They're there. Someone go find them. That's a lot of extra clicks. Rinse and repeat for anything else. This is just not amenable to content organization. It's bad. I really don't sound like I work here. So I do. So we fixed it. And we fixed it by mixed content. I'm going to say finally, and this is where I was supposed to snap everybody. Huh? I didn't snap. Darn, there we go. So pretend I'd done that, and now 18.3 is on, which, by the way, you can do. Because of the way I've organized my content, even though I can now see projects, workbooks, and data sources together, you've been organizing with tabs in your mind, with the fact that it's sort of pre-selecting for you. That has a tendency to freak people out, even though nothing has changed. The world has not changed. We have not broken a file. There's no linking. We're just displaying it differently. So what we're going to look at is pretend you could wipe the slate clean for a little bit. Go back through, and we're going to just do a real light scenario. In our scenario, we are a marketing team. Insert your team type here. Assume we have all the users, right? We have viewers, we have creators, we have explorers. Do we remember what creators can do that explorers can't? All right, great, fantastic. We've been given a project. We own it. And we want to set up our project so the right folks can see the right things. We want to enable a basic workflow where folks who are making data, folks who are using it to create, and the folks who are viewing the final product all get a better experience. Really what we're saying is we don't want a lot of noise. So here's our project. We have marketing dashboards. You can see here, yeah, that's basically for everybody. That could also have a slightly wider audience. So far as we know, it may not just be the marketing team. Folks could have access to this. In this scenario, I'm the creator, or I am a creator license-wise. I'm also Kurt Vonnegut. Now, I could be an explorer here, too. What's important to note is there's a workflow implicit here. Marketing dashboards are for most folks. They've got a description you can search. They're made to work even if you searched for them. It doesn't just say dashboards, it says marketing dashboards. This has an audience. Marketing Sandbox, that's full of workbooks. It's where we make our stuff. Where they go in there. I am working backwards. And then we have data sources. And again, even these data sources could be granted like access-wise and connection level to other folks, but we'll keep it to here for now. If I open it up, If I open up marketing data sources, well, that's nice. It's just data sources now. Projects got cleaner. You can do this now if you want. If it turns out there isn't other content in there, you don't have to care. It's nice. By the way, I'm showing everything in grid view because these cards are net new. Grid and list view is still there. You can switch between the two. Now, let's pop back out again. I'm gonna hop into that marketing sandbox. That's awesome. It's got an archive. That's just the old stuff. Looks like I've got some instructions in the description. And we'll say 4 or 5 projects. Looks like one of them's a copy. Most sandboxes I've seen are terrible. Like they're just giant messes. They are your closet. They are your desk drawers. That's not a problem. It's a sandbox. No one has to see it. Again, I'm going to pop back out again, but now I'm going to switch. I'm not an explorer or creator anymore. I'm a viewer. Well, I just get this. That's handy. Now, when I go in here as a viewer, well, that's great. I've got 4 workbooks that obviously look like they have some dashboards in them now. I'm going to tell you a little secret. There's actually just 6 dashboards total here. What was published and shown is 6 of however many are in, the workbooks in that sandbox have lots of sheets. But what they've published is essentially just 6 total. How many people here, when they go to open a workbook, go, why aren't you just taking me to viewing? Anybody here do that when you dive a level deeper? Or you have some mixture of someone responsible who owns one workbook, someone who owns another, and you have to do some coordination because they have to work in the same workbook because it's going to get published together because it's actually being used as a de facto folder. It happens. Again, no judgment. We do it. But what you can also do in 18.3 is head on up here to show all and say, all right, now, I'm not going to show you all of this, but if you just decide you don't want to see things in any project, you can uncheck them and they won't show up. That's another way to mitigate a noise situation if you haven't reorganized your content yet. Or you can say show workbooks as views. If I do that, you notice we switch the content from workbooks to views. See, there's 6 of them. And when I come back here, these are just the views that are available. And if you think about organizing your content so that this can be a viewer-focused sort of browsing experience, now instead of any tab moving or navigating down into workbooks and going, oops, I didn't mean to do that, you can just show people the views you want them to see when they come to a project. And again, you might think, all right, well, depending on my nested project structure, this project could be deep, and they're still going to have to go to it. And I don't have the admin who's going to run the script that automatically puts this in favorites for me. So what we've done is we've made sure in 18.3 that you can favorite a project, and then you can just come and grab it from your favorites anytime you want. And if you're on mobile, I think it's favorites first anyway. So you can start to craft a little bit more of an experience. I mean, essentially, this is what some folks cheekily refer to as CEO mode. You don't have to know much about Tableau. Here they are. Now, again, there's a lot of work going on under the covers in 18.3. There's actually a lot of other goodness, but for time's sake, we're gonna focus on what Ryan has to present here. We're also, the work we've done here in this first ship point is part of a path that we are going to be on throughout 2019. The labs that we'll show here at the end, our TC Lab activities that you can take part in are an opportunity for you to weigh in on where we go from here, and I think you're gonna like it. I'm gonna show you a little preview at the end there. But for now, know that you can try this. If you have 18.3 for server, or if you're in online, it's active right now, all you have to do is go to the admin panel, and under general, scroll down, that's there. This is non-destructive, it changes nothing. You toggle it on, the experience changes. Play with it, kick the tires brutally. There are a lot of calls we've made that we acknowledge we cannot continue to make in private. So your feedback is more than welcomed. We want it so bad. And if you want to talk about any other stuff afterwards, we absolutely can. If you want a tour of 18.3 off one of our laptops, I'd be happy to show you how it works or play with it, answer questions. But for now, I'd like to hand it over to Ryan.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Jason talked about structured organization versus organic organization, and that my talk is going to assume that some, if not most, or all of your server is going to adhere to some preconceived structure. And so my piece of this talk is to how to go about conceiving of that structure. So I want to first talk to philosophy a little bit. What drives us as admins? What should drive us, I think, is rolling back chaos where we have it, or avoiding it altogether if we're just starting out, right? So we're focused on probably a lot of things, but I'm going to submit these as drivers. We have manageability. How hard is it, how easy is it to ensure that the right eyeballs are seeing the right content? Predictability. I should know just looking at my groups, just by naming convention, that this group of people has this kind of access over this kind of content. If those things line up, I should have a confidence in my content security, and I'm also aimed at continuity of user experience across all audiences. So everything I talk about is geared toward these drivers. Are we buying into these as drivers for admins? Yeah? Okay. I'm sorry. Are you asking me to turn it up? Check test. Okay. So our goals are to create a simple, repeatable process for onboarding new audiences. And if we can create a simple, repeatable process, we can summarize that in a way that I can hand it off to somebody else, and if I get hit by a bus, they carry on with my process and without skipping a beat. And so how do we begin this process? One is to define what an audience is. Jason covered some of that. Then we want to define our user functions. And then we want to identify any maybe across-the-board restrictions. And then at the end, we want to come up with a workflow, because if we think through our workflow, out of that will shake the user organization and content organization. So before we ever create a group or create a project, we want to think about workflow. They will create themselves. So, audiences, as Jason said, maybe by function, maybe by department. Continuing with Jason's scenario, we're going to assume marketing is our audience. So we're going to, our audiences are going to be departmental. When we talk about user functions, though, we have several questions we kind of have to answer, or we ask ourselves. One, are data sources and workbooks published by the same people? Two, is there an approval process? And then three, how stringent is that process? If there's an approval process, can the workbook developer themselves productionalize their own content? Can they put it directly in front of the target audience? Let me just jump ahead to the restrictions thing real quick, because all those user function pieces, the scenarios that we come up that I'm going to show you in a minute will be increasingly complex answers to these questions. So I'm just going to tackle restrictions for a second, because I do want to show where this falls in a little bit later. So in this scenario, I'm going to say that my one restriction across the board is to discourage moving content from project to project. And that's because if I move a workbook from project A to project B, and a workbook of the same name already exists in project B, that action is going to fail. So I might be encouraged, therefore, to delete and replace. Well, if my process is to delete and replace, I'm also now deleting subscriptions, and I'm deleting extract schedules tied to that content, and any customized views. Anything that was pointing to that workbook is now gone, just because I have this delete and replace kind of process. So I want to discourage move and encourage republication. So I'm going to call that across the board a restriction. So let me go into my workflow examples, going from simple to increasingly more complex. So first one, the simple workflow is, there is no distinguishing between publisher types. My users that publish workbooks also publish data sources. There's no approval process, and workbook publishers, or in this case, publishers in general, can put things directly in front of their target audience. So that's this simple. I have a group of content creators. I have a group of content viewers. I have, personal Sandbox is not something that's department specific. I can just have, I'll show you how to create this a little bit later, but I can have one on the site. And in this scenario, I only need 2 departmental projects, one as a Sandbox and one we'll call production. So 2 groups of users and 2 projects. So simple, right? Stepping up in complexity a little bit, I do have distinctive content publisher types. The users that create data sources may or may not be the users that publish visual content, right? And maybe I have a workflow process, but it's somewhat informal. It's still the case that my publishers can productionalize their own content. So this is that scenario. Jason loves that I use the word productionalize. So what's different here? What's different is I have separated out my data source creators versus my workbook creators. I also have a data source project for my department. Now, why do I need a different project for data sources? I need a different project for data sources because I don't have the ability in any given project to distinguish between users that can publish data sources from users that can publish workbooks. So if I want to control who can publish what kind of thing, I have to give them each their own home. So I can say data source publishers put data sources here, workbook publishers put workbooks here. So we have, and then because I said we have an approval process here that's somewhat informal, I also have my content approvers that can look into the department's Sandbox and through whatever process give a thumbs up so that the workbook developers can publish into production where my target audience can view. Right? So we have now 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of users and 3 departmental projects. So we're stepping up in complexity somewhat. And jumping ahead to the most complex scenario I'll present, we have distinct publisher types, as we already did. We have a workbook approval process, but now this is a little more stringent because workbook publishers can't productionalize their own content. It has to go through a third party. Does anybody live in that kind of world right now? Okay, that's actually more than I thought I'd get. But I see this, and I see it plenty, and so this is an issue for a lot of people. But because now I'm introducing this kind of stringent process that may be a little bottlenecky, I also want a workflow that accommodates the ability for developers to put analysis in front of my users immediately, because that keeps business going. So I want to be able to accommodate both workflows. And maybe if I'm allowing them to publish ad hoc content without going through approval and promotion, maybe I put a time limit on what can live in this ad hoc space. And after class, maybe we can talk about how to automate such things. So this may be looking a little convoluted, but this is, you guys can get copies of the slide deck if you like. So what do we have here now? We still have our data source publisher publishing to data sources. We have now two kinds of workbook publisher. I didn't really talk about this in the last slide, but I can have, probably the folks building the lion's share of content using Tableau desktop, so they'll have naturally a creator license, but I may have some folks that just have an Explorer license in our new tiered model that can consume published data sources and still publish through the web publishing tool. And so both kinds of publishers can put their content in the personal sandbox and this ad hoc space with no approval process. It goes directly in front of the target audience. But they also both have the ability to publish into this approved workbook sandbox. So I'm making a distinction between ad hoc workbooks and approved workbooks, meaning workbooks that will go through this approval process. When a workbook lives in this approved workbook sandbox, the workbook's approver can view it, but also, and then once the approval happens, then this is a new role, a approved workbook promoter, as I will call it. I'm a little overly specific in my naming convention about what people do. These people are promoting, I'm calling them a promoter. So my approved workbook promoter can look into the sandbox, open up what they find there in the web editing tool, and then save that content into production, thereby overwriting what may already be there. So it's not a move action, it's a publish action. We talked before about why that's great. So what do we have here now? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups per audience. And 1, 2, 3, 4 projects. 6 groups, 4 projects. And so we're saying if we're creating this simple, repeatable process, that we're carving this out for every audience we onboard. And here are those 4, the 4 projects and 6 groups of users, right? One thing you may notice and question me on is, why do I have all of these? Why do I have all of these projects at the peer level right under the site? I would love to be able to just create a marketing main project and sub-project all these other ones. Wouldn't that lead to a much cleaner site setup? And the answer is yes, it would. However, the current state of the nesting project, the project nesting feature and how permissions work is limited in this particular way, that I can only lock at the root level. And that means if I want different projects to have different permissions, I have to leave that whole tree unlocked, which means anybody publishing into an unlocked project can set their own permissions on whatever they're publishing, which means my predictability is out the window and my confidence in my security strategy is out the window. So if I really want to set my permissions and lock it all down, I really can't be nesting, not with these main projects that we saw on this other workflow. Yes, sir? The product managers in the room would be happy to address this. Yes. And we get some vigorous shaking of the head, yes. Or nodding is what that was. I will say that, I mean, the nesting thing is perfectly handy if you're okay with that everything in that nesting structure has all the same permissions. Like in this marketing scenario, I may break out marketing into events and into campaigns. And it's just an organizational tool, and that's great. But if I really mean for different people to see events versus campaigns, I may have to not use this nesting structure. Okay. I'm not going to dig deep into permissions here, but I do want to show you the permission screens on all the projects that we saw in that workflow, because the permissions is what supports that whole workflow. You got to get that right. And so you don't have to memorize any of this stuff. I just want to point out what's special about those permission screens. And you guys can get copies of this, and if you want to try to replicate this, it should be pretty straightforward. But I just want to talk about where we're interested in setting permissions, right? At the highest level possible. We want to set it for groups of people on groups of content, always, if we can get away with it, right? Actually, I'm going to show you an exception a little later. And why is that? Because we're trying to ease our burden as admins. And also, we want to be able to lock projects. So we want to set it for groups of people on groups of projects, meaning groups of content, meaning projects, and then lock it all down. And so I know that anything published into that project will be seen by a certain group of people, and I don't have to think about it anymore. I usually get a question about exceptions on workbooks such that I have some content every once in a while, maybe 10% of what I publish, that is designed for certain eyeballs that don't fit nicely into the structure we've just created. I need, a couple of these C staffers and this group over here, and Bob has to see this workbook. How can I deal with that given the structure you've just created for me? Do I have to create a whole new audience for this kind of hodgepodge I just created? No, we can create a place for exceptions like that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I want to design my structure for the 90% use case and then figure out what to do with exceptions. And so that's what we're doing here. You'll see in the slides as I go forward, for simplicity and readability, and just because I recommend it as much as possible, we're going to use these capability roles. And there's one per resource type in all these permission screens. So instead of selecting particular capabilities for these group rules, I'm gonna pick capability roles. The fact that they aren't customizable is a little bit of a pain, but that's why I'm creating this plan for overriding the fact that they over-allow some things by using the all users group in all my projects, including the default project, to apply that restriction that I came up with earlier. Remember, I don't want anybody to be able to move anything, but I don't want to have to go into every rule in every project permission screen and make sure there's either an X or an emptiness where the move capability sits. I can just exit out across the board for all my projects, including on my default project, which means that rule will exist on any new project I create, and that red X will take care of the over-allowing, for in this case, move, that happens when I use those roles in other rules. Does that make sense? I'm going a little fast because we're a little tight on time. Okay, so this is the data source project. What's interesting about this? I have my data source publisher. They have total control over everything. They can publish into the project, and they have full editing control over the data sources. Everyone else is a viewer at the project level and a connector at the data source level. Why don't I have any permissions set up at the workbook level? Because I don't expect any workbooks in here. That's not to say that the data source publisher who can publish into this project, that's not going to keep them from necessarily publishing a workbook here if they actually wanted to for whatever reason. But because there are no permissions on the workbook level and this project is locked, no one is ever going to be able to see a workbook sitting in this project. This is a data source project. It's not impossible for a workbook to live here. It's just impractical because of the permissions I'm setting up. And by the way, why do my workbook promoters, why do my workbook promoters need connect privileges here? These are the guys moving content from the sandbox to production. It's because they are opening that workbook first in the web edit tool, which means they have to connect to the underlying data sources in that editing experience So they need to connect privileges, just like the publishers do. This is the Workbook Sandbox, the sandbox for workbooks that will eventually be approved. The only thing of note here is that the promoters have the exact same kind of access that the approvers do, which is to say they are interactors essentially, but they need to have the added capability of making a copy of that workbook in a different project. So they need that kind of download, save as capability added. So this is I think maybe the one slide where I'm not using those capability roles. This one says custom because because this doesn't adhere to any of those capability roles that exist in the tool. This is production, and you'll notice that here the promoters publish into this project and have full control of all the content here. Everyone else is restricted to essentially being an interactor of content in this project. This is for ad hoc workbooks. Here, all I care about is that all my publishers can put things in here, and my viewers can view it directly. Simple. We talked about a personal sandbox. Yes, sir. Well, leaving it blank accomplishes the same thing. But what I didn't want to have to do is go line by line, leaving it blank. What I'd rather do is add that red X for all users on top, which will override all those green checks. I want to be able to use my roles. So it's me being lazy, but it's also really easy. Because we'll see in a minute, if I can stick to those predefined roles, there's many, many fewer clicks to implementing rules in your permission screens, and it's much clearer to document. So if I can come up with a strategy of just using that all users group to provide all my denials, then I can use roles for everything else. Again, the personal sandbox. This is something that you just need one of on a site. It's kind of a fake personal sandbox. I think Jason will get into later about how we're going into a place of a real personal sandbox. That would be great. But for now, we can fake it. And we can fake it by creating a project and letting anybody who can publish into that project, but putting no permissions on anything else, workbooks or data sources, and then locking that project down. That means if I'm one of these publishers, I can put something in that project, I can see it because I'm the owner, and that's how things work, but no one else that has access to this project will even know it's there. So it will look to everyone to be their own personal sandbox, even though we're all contributing to the same project. Yeah? And if I can come up with a strategy like this, a workflow that I think will work for all my audiences, and it's a repeatable thing, then I know every time I onboard an audience, I'm going to create these groups of users. I'm going to create these projects, and I'm going to apply these permissions. And it's that simple. It's a simple spreadsheet. I can hand it to someone, they can just follow it. I do want to point out, this is the exceptions place. Where do I put my workbooks that don't adhere to this kind of audience structure that I've put in place? And this looks just very much like that personal sandbox. I just allow people to publish in here, but I will leave this thing unlocked. It's unlocked specifically because we're allowing people to put content level permissions in place, which is something we swore we didn't want to do, but this is our exception bucket. And maybe we'll keep an eye on this exception bucket, and maybe we'll trim things out of it on a rolling basis. But this is where I do want to accommodate exceptions where I need to, but impose that structure where possible for ease of management, for predictability, for confidence in my security strategy, right? That's essentially what I've got, and I think I'm going to hand it back to Jason to talk about futures.
Hi, I'm back. Good to see everybody. Okay, first, the part where I do lead gen for my colleagues who are all awesome. But like I said, this is in your best interest. Now, There's actually, one of these sessions is still going on today. I didn't include it because it might be signed or filled up, but you should go and have a look. Mine All Mine, your private space and Tableau server. Now, what are we talking about? Ignore the beauty, it's okay. What we're actually saying here is we are doing a lot of work oftentimes. Lots of customers do it, setting up sandboxes. If you think about how many users you have and how many they could potentially grow to if they're creating content and Tableau is going well, or you're just creating content, the overhead to make sandboxes for folks is pretty brutal. What we're looking to do is to provide a private sandbox for explorers and creators. Maybe even, as you can see in this concept, combine it with the oft neglected because pretty much hidden My Content dropdown that's currently in the product on the right, so that users, particularly explorers and creators, can navigate directly to an area that includes their materials. This would be entirely private by default, and if that user has no permission to put anything in any other projects, you have instant governance. You also likely have a much smoother flow when it comes to saving your content or publishing it from desktop. Instead of going, okay, where am I allowed to? Well, by default, you know you can do it here. We think that's just a nice workflow improvement. We're looking into how you quota them, how you actually manage them, what makes sense for folks. We have thoughts. We'd like to get yours. We're pretty much sure we haven't thought of everything. So if you have interest, you can come through and run through some prototypes and some concepts if you're interested. Also, a lot of what we've talked about today is the result of the fact that when you land in Tableau, you land in an unfiltered search return without the all section. That's what you get. Now, before I move on, actually, Anne, who is our new product manager for the content management team, she's in the back of the room. I can't see her. I don't even know if she's happy, but usually she is. If you'd like to talk to her, if you can't get to a lab, please do. If you'd like to talk to her and you can get to a lab, please do. She's awesome, and that's really all I can say about that. Let's see here. Next one. Like I said, you're beholden to the browsing methodology. Tableau's experience is its directory structure. We don't think that really cuts it. Don't think you do either. So we have some labs to explore the idea of, hey, look, home. What if you could have a landing experience that, one, allowed you, regardless of where content was, maybe as a content admin or admin of other sorts, make sure certain folks in certain groups got things on a landing experience. We do want to improve sharing. We're going to take that off the table for this conversation. We also hope you've been paying attention throughout the different conferences, talking about our automated insights folks. We have the ability with these servers to generate recommendations to you. We know based on your permissions. We'd like to do that more often. We're making investments in machine learning to make better recommendations. And this one, you can see kind of two flavors maybe, based on your recent activity and assuming that this person's an explorer, maybe based on the visits they've been building. Here's some certified data sources that would be of value to you. Again, trending and popular, are they different? We don't know. Lots of people have opinions. Please come to the lab and tell us. This is just the very beginning of that conversation, but this is what we're looking into for 2019, along with just general quality of life improvements, like a dedicated section for your favorites, for your recents if you do browse a lot. A more responsive experience so that if you don't have the apps deployed, you can at least get the things and experience it when you're on your devices via the browser. And if you can't get to the labs, Sean Lee is out and about. He's our product manager. His contact information is here from the Seamless Experience team. We got a lot of stuff we're working on, 2019 and beyond. We'd love to hear from you if you'd like to get sneak peeks or be involved or have some very specific wants regardless of what we've shown you. We want to hear it. We also would love for you to tell everybody that we're awesome. Please? No. Rate as you feel. But we do also want to open it up for some questions if folks have them. I'm just going to go, I'm right, yeah.
How often do you have customers that have like a separate development server?
We have that. Often I would say I run into it less than I used to, but it still shows up all the time. The reasons were varied. It used to be for load. Now the way we do it, or if someone's using like an AWS deployment, it's not so much. But yeah, I mean, it happens. Is there something specific about how often do they do because?
Not particularly, just because the examples that you're giving with how you're doing you know, that publication process, but when it's an entirely separate server,
Yeah.
you can open up that sandbox and then it just doesn't let the impact on your production system. Also, like, if you have something scheduled and it's going to go out in an email, that's kind of like at the server level to say, hey, you're allowed to schedule workbooks in email. If I've got that all encapsulated into one server and somebody puts it in there in the sandbox area, and they start emailing out an executive dashboard that nobody's approved, so I don't know how you handle that when you're not, hey, it's a
Sure.
separate server, totally shut off, you literally.
Right. Well, first let me, on the thing that isn't real yet, that sandbox is locked all the way tight. Like, you're not emailing the actual work you have. If that person's an explorer, they actually can't get it down either because they don't have desktop. So there's a little bit more security in there. Know that anytime we go to make anything now, we have to go through the absolutely unsexy but sexy process of saying, all right, now what are my governance rules for anything that's better? So we're thinking through a lot of those. I don't think it's a problem in the sandbox scenario, but to pivot to the other thing, we have a lot of controls that we know either sit at the site level or the server level and aren't granular enough. I'd want to pivot the conversation and talk to you really about that. It's like, all right, how many of these controls need to go further down? Because we've had that conversation too. Do we need to bring more things at the user level or the group level? You know, do we need to make it such that an admin can enable a group within an area, like a project or whatnot, and then go, all right, now you can do this. You folks are contained to here. Your damage is contained. And if I can end the answer on what I should have started with, a lot of folks used to keep things in different servers to build the biggest wall, or because they had a performance thing. As they stuck with it for a while or added more cores, they just kind of relaxed. They got their models down, they realized it wasn't risky as possible, and they started to aggregate, more towards one server. So that's another reason I see less of it, I think. Double check, talk with other folks. I see a very oftentimes specific group of folks. So I won't claim that I've seen everything or have all the answers. Sometimes even I can get super narrowed down and not realize it's happened. But in my experience, it's as I said. Is that a good answer? Awesome.
So looking at the server, so trying to figure out the scenario you mentioned where you had to have a separate group that did the file open and save as, like, is there a reason we can't just do a copy? Is there something I'm missing? Like,
Well, there is no copy function.
but is there a reason that's not out there or something under the covers or it's just not there? It seems like that would make it a lot easier if I could just copy. I could give my admin the ability to copy, he's got full access.
Yeah, well, we want it to behave like a publish for the reasons I said. But, yeah,
Well,
that would be the case.
let's pretend, and the question was, because I forgot to pick up on my fault. The question was, why can't I just copy? Why is move, move is my only option, or the save as there. It's how it was built. That's a terrible answer. What I mean to say was, there were some decisions made a long time ago. Those decisions don't need to remain the case. A lot of what we're exploring and a lot of the reasons we can't just go, you know what, you deserve the things you want, you can have them, is that permissions model has, it's a knot once it's been tied, and you can't just cut it and start over. But if you take it out, some things have been bucketed together underneath. So there's a Postgres database with all these integers that equal all the verbs in the server. And for convenience's sake, or for old requirements, or for whatever the world was then, we bound them. But I would consider, as far as you as a customer, your options open as to what you request and what you want. Don't be bound by the tool we gave you when it comes to asking, because we have to reevaluate permissions to get a robust sort of collaboration plus governance experience, and we're looking at that stuff right now. You, ma'am.
One of the things that we run into is that we have teams who really like sort of the iterative process of creating a draft dashboard and then sending it out to a couple of people for testing, and then bringing it back in and adjusting it, and then sending it out to more people for testing. And so it's not really a great fit for the personal sandbox, but it's also not a great fit for the full production space.
Exactly.
Is that a situation where you would encourage using that ad hoc type of space, or have you run into that?
Yeah, and we did talk about a place for not ready for prime time content where probably a subset of the end user audience that I had called the approvers would be able to peer into that space and communicate back to development. And that's what that was about, is having a staging area for stuff that's not quite ready, that needs some kind of approval, and have a group of people that can provide that approval that isn't quite all of the end user audience.
Just clarifying, not necessarily approvers, but actual stakeholders.
Right.
Content, maybe,
Yeah, and you're,
same thing.
sure, yeah, and your mileage may vary on the exact nature of the workflow. I called it approvers because
Right.
that's he likes to use the word verb, that's what they will be doing, is approving. And so essentially they are giving their thumbs up on what they're looking at so that it can be productionalized. And yes, that is the scenario I was covering, exactly.
So I'll handle kind of management, project management. I'll jump in because what Brian's describing is how you can use what we have today on Tableau server and Tableau online in order to accomplish what you're asking for. What I would love is for you to come down to our lab tomorrow and Thursday and talk about what it is that you're trying to do. Because what we envision for this personal sandbox is that it's a place for you to iterate and create your content until you're ready to share it with others. What we want to understand is, what does that mean to you? Does that mean that you need to be able to share that content from your sandbox to a group of other people? Or do you actually want it to be so secure that no one else can ever get to it ever? And as admins, we want to understand, what are you worried about if we give your users personal sandboxes? So please come down and talk to us. We want to understand what those workflows are so that we can build the right product for you.
Yeah, I mean, what she said, +1. I mean, I'm a huge fan of person-to-person sharing via the Sandbox. Anne is just tired of hearing me tell everybody the good news about tacos on that. But I can't get around the fact that if you can't sell it to an admin, it's not happening, right? You know, the other thing too that we'd love to talk to you folks about is just that whole, we reference it the whole time. There's an interplay, right? The demands of the people that just want their content and come on, why are you so mean to me? And the answer is, well, I don't want to be, but I don't have the time or the brain time to get this all done quickly. One of the things we're looking to enable is these workflows without having to create a bucket every time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have explorations around sharing point to point, around sharing if you're the owner and assigning other folks permissions. One thing that's implicit in that My Sandbox concept is that that's when we actually start changing the permissions model a little bit. One very clear example there is, how can you be the owner of something if, say, more than one person doesn't know it exists and they overwrite it and all of a sudden they became the owner? One of the things we're looking at is that, well, ownership should probably stick with the creator until they transfer it. And an owner of a piece of content should likely be allowed to be able to say, someone else can edit this without having to lose ownership, because once they have accountability, they can have a relationship. That still technically is my opinion, even though it's there. So we need to hear from you folks to know what, you know, either what just won't fly or what you think is a really bad idea as an admin, that after we show you the process in action can go, "No, it's not, actually my requirements have not been validated from a security standpoint." And there's a lot more that we're working on around that, and your brain went right to it. So, cool. You, sir.
How does this entire commissioning scheme that you were showing us today interact with the new license types of creator, explorer, and viewer? So, for example, if somebody wasn't a creator license, but they were marked as your approver in your approver group.
Yeah, well, if you, I didn't do a very good job of pointing this out, but on those workflow diagrams, I did suggest what license type each one would require. So in that case, the approver group only needed essentially a viewer license, because all they're doing is interacting with visuals and nothing more. Whereas the what I call the promoter needed an explorer license, because they're opening that workbook up in the online editor to do a save as, and an explorer can do that. And I had all those icons, those people icons, labeled according to what I thought would be the appropriate license level for them. So when you go online and pull down these workbooks, you should see that.
So the licenses would then override whatever permissions you set for that.
Actually, no. You would need both. The licenses do not override the permissions. You can think of licenses, actually, it's more like site roles. I'm familiar enough with the server to know that you don't set licenses for users, you set site roles. And the most permissive site role that a user has across all the sites they belong to that tells the server which license to assign them, essentially. But you can think of a site role as a cap on what a user can possibly do in that site. So I can put that user in a group that can publish into a project, but if they don't have a site role that gives them some kind of publishing ability, they can't do it. So the site role is a cap.
And we are in between worlds, because a lot of folks are still on the old model in which they purchased. So it's messier than anyone likes. Like, it causes heartache just to look at. The Interactor has become the Explorer, but we have, there's Explorer can publish, because there's people who had licenses before that actually have desktop. So we can't just shut the door on folks that have spent good money and had, intention to use these products. That'll simplify over time. But yeah, right now, if your job is to approve but not to change, viewer is really all you need. And I forgot to mention it, thank you for doing it. There's so many, I should just keep a flashcard. That whole, crap, I have to deal with minimum site role is a lot of reasons people roll things into one site. They just don't want to deal with it anymore. And
Yeah, and there is actually a session to talk about kind of the transition of the different licensing roles. We can look it up after to show you the times. So it better explains kind of what the differences are in the license types and what it means now versus what it did last year.
Right. Yeah. Oh, great, another question.
So how long do you expect the data site to be up? Do you want to go beyond just testing, maybe create a mock-up to show, say,
Yeah.
here's where you could be going to?
Right. Well, it's on in 18.3. What we've done is just hidden it. That actual experience is in beta in 18.3. It's just turned off by default. You can go in and turn it on per site. So if you have online, you just turn it on and create a new site and play with it for that site. And you can leave your old site the same. And if you have server, you can, stand up a new site and turn it on as well.
And you should have 18.3 GA at some point. I can't give you
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure when the beta for 18.3 server is out. It's out, yeah.
18.3's out. If you're in Tableau Online, if you're in Tableau Online, you have it now. You can go to site settings, you can turn it on. If you're on Tableau server on-prem, if you upgrade to 18.3, that's when you'll get it. You can also participate in our pre-release program. We have an online pod, so you don't have to install anything, and you can try it out, play with it. It's pre-release or pr.tableau.com.
Yeah, that's why we're doing it, and that's actually another thing about the granularity. Think about the granularity like these things at. The question for us was server or site, and we're like, ugh, site. So.
Thank you for the slides. Wonderful to be able to take those, kind of share them with our management, and say, this is a thought and best practice.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome. And your management has our email once they have the slides. So if they really need to double verify, we're happy to do it. I'm a real person.
Not just me saying this, but you're recommending. Let's move on.
Right.
Was there a question here?
Yeah, we're using a whole bunch of different tools for different products. We have, Tableau, we have some Power BI and all.
Yeah.
It seems like we're buying like several different types of software to do basically the same thing, gathering submissions or else including a group. So it seems like to me that when Tableau moves in this direction, it kind of muddies the water because someone else has already done it for another product and they're joining it with Tableau. So should we, get the money, to purchase a new product that's going to change, continue to change, or do we buy a third-party, software that will do the change for us? So that's my question. Is it really worth it in the end? What you're talking about every time you do a change,
Yeah.
there's another version, a buy.
So I'm going to ask, and that one might go for a while when we talk about it, we'll ask you this. Do you use Active Directory to set your permissions initially? Is that how you import your users? Yeah. So,
Thank you, everyone.
yeah, thanks a lot, folks. What we might want to think about, talking about, because we are thinking about it, sorry, that was a long way for nothing, is maybe not just importing your name and your picture and your email from Active Directory, but allowing us to go, seriously, how much effort did you put into setting your permissions in Active Directory and using those to stand up the permissions in Tableau so that they map automatically? Because I don't know about you, I got into UX design because I am so lazy in my heart, and extra clicks make me sad, right? Like, I'll lose $100 to skip a click. So, I would say that your question is just valid, and the answer is it'd be up to you, man. Right. So why don't we look at some of the things that we're looking at that maybe would alleviate that and see if your question changes. Like if you're saying, hey, if you can bind to Active Directory permissions better, you just maybe not worry anymore. Mhm.
multiple tasks which they go through,
Mhm.
which the typical user does not care for.
Totally.
You know, so trying to make a product that will match those needs is very, we use like Bitbucket for
Mm-hmm.
developers, and then moving on further down the, I guess, data stream.
Well, I want to hook you up with some of the folks from Data Catalog and some of the folks to go deeper. Like, we have engineers here who designed our permission service and have rebuilt the service underneath it so that things are getting easier. What you need is them, because right now you're going to hit the limits of what I can remember without looking at a piece of paper, and they can go all day. So if you'd like to meet them, I'll actually, I'll bring them to you. You give me your contact stuff, we'll come find you. We'll talk it through. Yeah. Well, I don't see any more questions, but happy to talk offline. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.